Welcome to Module 1 of the Spiritual Badass Academy Yoga Teacher Mentorship. Today's module is titled, Who the Fuck Are You? Two parts to today's module that we'll be discussing. Part number 1, your mission and philosophy as a yoga teacher. What is it? How to find it? Why is it important? Number 2, your voice as a yoga teacher. Your mission and philosophy as a yoga teacher is very important. Where you live, you are probably not the only yoga teacher, but you're the only yoga teacher that is just like you. When we can identify what we believe in as a yoga teacher and what we want to pass on to our students as a yoga teacher, then we become this unique individual amongst this sea of teachers around us. That allows us to find students that connect with us, and it allows us to start to build a community based around who we are and how we teach. So we're going to go through an exercise, a way to start to identify your philosophy and your mission as a teacher. We're going to start with our why. Why you practice yoga, why you teach yoga. We're going to narrow our why down into our story, the story behind ourselves as an instructor and the story behind ourselves as a student. We like to think of things in terms of storytelling because humans learn well via storytelling. They connect with each other via the telling of stories. So if we can create our story, identify our story, and clarify our story as it relates to yoga, it's going to make it much easier for students to connect with us. Once we have our story, we are going to distill our philosophy about teaching out of our story. And from our philosophy, we'll come up with our mission. Almost like a business has a mission statement, you will have a mission statement as a teacher. So before we get started, make sure you have a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper or a journal, and we're going to go through this exercise together. You're going to create this sort of upside down pyramid shape, almost like a funnel. And we're going to create 1, 2, 3, 4 lines in the funnel. Where we're starting at the top of our funnel is ourselves as a yoga student. It's important to take ourselves back to that initial place where we began as a student of the practice of yoga, because that's who we're trying to connect with, our students. So in order to connect with them, we have to be relatable to them. So where we're going to begin is as a student, where we're going to end is as a teacher. In the top box, you're going to write, why did I come to yoga? And what I want you to do is think about why you came to your very first yoga class. What was it that brought you into a studio or onto your mat for the first time? Did you come for the physical practice of yoga? Did you come for the meditation or the breathing? Did you come because somebody dragged you there? Literally, what was the very first yoga class you went to and why did you go there? From there, in the next box, you're going to write, why did I keep coming back? And this one's really important. What made you go from that first class to the second class, and then the third, fourth, fifth, etc.? Maybe you went right away. Maybe the next day you were back in a yoga class because you loved it so much. Or maybe it took you years to get back on your mat. What was it that kept you coming back as a student? And then we're going to start to identify that transition between student and teacher. So somewhere after these first two boxes, you began to think that you might want to teach yoga. So in box number 3, you're going to write, what resonates with me about yoga? What was it that really touched you somewhere inside that made you think, I want to bring this practice to other people? Maybe it's a specific text or a book you read or a teacher that you had, an experience that you experienced, or a change that you felt in your own life. What was it that resonated with you so much about practicing yoga that you wanted to become a teacher of yoga? And now that you've been teaching, whether it's for 6 months or for 15 years, in this fourth box, who or what continues to inspire me? Are there certain teachers that you go to for inspiration? Are there books that you read? Are there videos that you watch or music that you listen to? What is it that keeps you inspired to continue to teach? And then in this very last bottom box, you're going to write, what do I hope to pass on to my students? When you step in front of a room of students, what is it that you want to leave them with? Do you want them to learn something? Do you want them to be inspired to teach? Do you want them to feel something specific in their own bodies? Or to create a sense of relaxation and peace and calm in their minds? What is it that you hope to pass on to your students? Now, before we kind of filter this out, let's use myself as an example, and let's go through this entire process. So if I think of myself as a student, the very first time I walked into a yoga class, I was 19 years old. I was living in Boston. I was running half marathons, and I was studying to be a doctor of physical therapy. So I came to yoga initially purely for the physical practice. I knew that I needed to stretch, and I thought that if I was in a hot room, stretching might be more comfortable, and I would feel better in my running. And I did, and that was why I kept coming back to yoga. That's why I went back to that Baptiste class that third time, that fourth time, that fifth time. And honestly, for probably the first 5 years of my practice, I went purely for the physical practice. It wasn't until I'd been practicing for quite a while, I'd graduated from college, I was living in San Diego, I was starting a new career, that I realized that I was also getting emotional and mental benefits from yoga. And I started to explore things like meditation and breathing. So initially I came back for the physical practice, and then eventually transitioned into understanding that I was getting this much deeper emotional, mental practice as well. After 9 or 10 years of being a student of yoga, I thought that I might want to teach yoga. What resonated with me about the practice of yoga was that I knew where I had started. I knew that I had started purely for the physical practice, and that it had taken me a really long time to even care about anything other than that. And I knew that that meant there were other people like me. There were other athletes or simple human beings who wanted to move their bodies in ways that felt good, and maybe weren't interested at all in meditation or breath work or spirituality or philosophy. And I found that many of the teachers I was taking class from, and many of the studios I went to, really focused on those other things, on the meditation, on the breath work, on the spirituality, on the philosophy, and maybe we're turning off a whole population of people from the practice of yoga. So I thought, if I can teach yoga from where I started as a student, and then I can help people be introduced to their pathway of yoga. And if they choose to continue on like I did, wonderful. And if not, that's also wonderful. It still means that they got into a mindful movement practice of some sort. So I became a teacher. I've been teaching for almost 5 years. What continues to inspire me is all over the board. Sometimes it's as simple as taking a yoga class and having an interesting transition or posture or sequence that I haven't thought about or haven't practiced ever or in a long time. Oftentimes lately it's social media, and not yoga teachers on social media. I find a lot of inspiration from other types of movement, from gymnasts, from athletes, from coaches, from trainers, and that works its way into my practice. My history as a physical therapist definitely inspires me to teach yoga in the way that I do. So my inspiration is kind of all over the place. But when I step foot on a mat and I teach a yoga class, what I hope to pass on to my students is that they can feel their bodies. They can connect with their bodies. They can understand how their bodies work. They can feel better in their own body, and they can understand that their body is unique to them and it's not the same as the person next to them. So their yoga practice is unique to them, and it's not going to be the same as the person next to them. I want people to feel empowered in their physical body when they take a yoga class from me. So that's my pathway through the funnel. Once you've done your pathway through the funnel, what you're left with is sort of your philosophy as a teacher. Now, if I told that entire story from start to finish, every time I stepped foot in a yoga studio to teach a class, I would run out of time very quickly. So instead of telling my entire story, my entire philosophy, I want to boil it down to a mission statement, something that's very short, very concrete, very easy to get across, not only to my students, but also to other teachers or studio owners or on social media, so that people understand what I'm about as a yoga teacher. So my philosophy, we just went through. My mission statement, if I take that from my philosophy, might be something like this. It's my mission to empower my students to feel strong, healthy, and happy in their bodies, and to want to learn how their bodies function and work the best. Period. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward, and it's going to give you an idea of what to expect when you come into a yoga class of mine. The other reason it's important to start to identify your philosophy and mission as a yoga teacher is that it's going to guide how you teach. If I know that my philosophy and mission are all centered around the physical experience somebody has on their mat, then that's going to be the focus of every one of my classes. My classes are all going to be very focused on asana, on alignment, on teaching students about their own bodies. So if I start to teach a class that's way up here, that's talking all about spirituality, that's primarily breath work and meditation, or has a lot of quotes from texts, that doesn't fit with my mission and my philosophy. And a student who's used to me and a student who wants to learn the way I like to teach, if they come take that class from me, it's going to be very confusing and it's going to feel incredibly disconnected from the way that I normally teach. So you want to start to identify this strong platform from which you stand as a teacher so that your students can know what to expect when they take your yoga class. Of course, not everybody's going to want to come into a yoga studio and take a class the way I teach it. And that's okay. It's really important to remember that it's your students that will find you and you who will find your crowd. Not everybody's going to like what you do, what you stand for, or the way you teach yoga, and that's 100% okay. There are lots of yoga teachers out there, and each one offers something a little bit different, and they will find their teacher, and those teachers will also find their students. Now, what if I change my mind about my philosophy? What if I take a course or have a life experience, and now the way I think about yoga has altered in some way, shape, or form? That's to be expected. We're humans, we grow, we evolve. So I think it's a really wonderful activity to come back to what we just did. Maybe every 6 months or every year or every time you experience a major life change and see if what inspires you, who inspires you, what you want to continue to pass on to your students, see if those things stay the same or see if they alter or change as your life experience does. And if they do, then change your mission and change your philosophy and make sure that the way that you're teaching reflects those changes. Let's talk about the first component of your voice. What do you actually sound like? How fast do you talk? What kind of pitch do you use? What volume do you speak at? We've all had the experience of walking into a yoga studio and being greeted at the front desk by the yoga teacher. Maybe they're checking you in, or maybe they're saying hello or introducing themselves. You have a wonderful, lovely conversation, and then you go into the studio and you get set up for class, and the teacher comes in a few minutes later to start class, and all of a sudden, their voice is completely different. Instead of sounding normal and conversational, they might start to sound flowy and light, and the whole pitch of their voice might go up or it might go down. And now you're left kind of wondering what happened in the 100 feet between the front desk and the yoga studio. Why did that person change? You want to make sure that the way you're speaking in front of your classes is authentic to you. Doesn't mean you're going to speak the same way all the time, just like you don't speak to your friends the same way you speak to your parents, the same way you speak to your bosses. You're not going to speak the exact same, but you should sound like you. You should sound like you would sound if you ran into your yoga student at the grocery store. You want them to feel like they're hearing from you. The second part of your voice are the actual words you choose to say. And this is where I think you can really help pass along your mission and philosophy well without actively having to tell your students, I'm passing my mission on to you. So let's use me as an example again. If my mission and philosophy are all wrapped up in the physical practice of yoga and helping people understand their bodies and their alignment and the way they feel, then the words I'm going to choose to use are going to reflect that. So my classes are going to be very anatomical sounding. They're going to be very matter of fact. They're going to have a lot of verbal cueing about alignment, I might use words like lift or lower or reach or raise, but they're all going to be very directional words that help a student's body land in a certain place. If I were to use really flowy words, things that had more to do with spirituality or emotion or experience, then it may not help me get across my point in the same way. You also want to pay attention to the words that you use as filler words. When you're teaching a class, do you feel the need to fill every silent space? And how do you fill those silent spaces? Do you say words like or Oftentimes in yoga you hear good, great, wonderful, nice. Sometimes you'll hear on the next inhale or on the next exhale, when in reality you probably could just say inhale and exhale. So you want to start to pay attention to those extra vocabulary words that you're using as well. All of this sounds easy and wonderful and great to get across when I'm talking to you, but how do you know if you're doing it while you're teaching a class? The best way is to do what I'm doing right now and film yourself. Oftentimes you can't film yourself in a studio. There's all sorts of privacy regulations, but you can film yourself at home, teaching a friend or a family member, or just running through a sequence on your own. Or maybe you can voice record a class while you're teaching instead of filming it, so that you can go back and listen to those words. So you want to start to really notice, what do I sound like? Does it sound like me? Do I need to be faster or slower? Am I talking really high-pitched? Or am I strangely very serious and low? Am I changing my voice to be sing-songy and flowy, because that's what I think yoga teachers are supposed to sound like? What words am I using? Am I just repeating the same words over and over and over again? Am I using words that are really creative and really flowery just to fill space or to sound a certain way? And is there a crutch word that I have that I use over and over and over to fill empty space in my yoga class? So 2 pieces of homework. Homework number 1, go through that whole process we just went through. Hopefully you did that while we were going through it together. From there, I want you to write out your philosophy and then distill it into your mission statement. Homework piece number 2, if you can, record yourself teaching. Write down some of the things you hear in your voice or in your word selection that may not serve you well, and see if there's something you can do, a plan you can make to change those. Thank you for watching Module 1 of the Spiritual Badass Academy Yoga Teacher Mentorship. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.